Welcome back to Steam Family Outdoors. As always, please consider subscribing to the channel. This week, we're talking about rifle cartridges again with a real burner, the 257 Weatherby Magnum. And the request for this cartridge came from one of the viewers who left a comment in a previous video wanting to learn more about the 257 Weatherby Magnum and especially talking about it in some faster twist barrels. So if you're out there and you're listening to the channel and there's a cartridge you want to hear us talk more about, please put it in the comments below and we'll get it added to our list. So today, the 257 Weatherby Magnum, we're going to talk about some cartridge history. We're going to look at how that cartridge performs in a more standard twist barrel with more traditional bullet weights in the 257 cartridge. And then we're going to talk about how does it perform in a fast twist barrel with modern, sleek, high BC bullets. So the 257 Weatherby Magnum came about in the mid 1940s, about 1945, along with a slew of other Weatherby Magnums, kind of the first batch that came out. So the 257 Weatherby, 270 Weatherby, 7mm Weatherby, and 300 Weatherby Magnums all came out in that same time period in the mid 1940s, and they were all based on the 375 H&H Magnum. Technically, it was the 300 H&H Magnum, but that 300 H&H Magnums derived from the 375 H&H. So when you look at the 257 Weatherby Magnum, you're going to notice that it has that classic belt that we see on belted Magnums from that era, kind of the mid 1940s with the original Weatherby Magnums, going through at the mid 1960s when we saw things like the 300 Winchester Magnums, the 7mm Remington Magnum, and a host of other belted Magnum cartridges. Some other things that make all these Weatherby Magnums stick out is the classic double radiused shoulder. So when you look in here close, you can see that the shoulder on this cartridge doesn't come at an angle, but it has a radius coming up out of the shoulder, and then it radiuses again as it goes into the neck. So that's the double radius shoulder, and we'll put it next to a more modern cartridge, and you can see the sharp angles that a modern cartridge has. So that was just a staple of Weatherby cartridges, and there's a host of reasons why it's been said that they have this double radius shoulder. Some will say that it creates this Venturi effect where you can get powder swirling in, it gives a better combustion of powder. The other one that's come out is that it's kind of a way to keep your cartridge a little bit more proprietary, to have a unique shoulder angle that Weatherby's tended to have. So the truth of which one it is, I'm not 100% sure myself. If you have an opinion on it, let us know in the comments below too. Something that makes the 257 Weatherby unique compared to some of the modern contemporary Magnums that followed it is the overall length. So this comes in at about 3.1 inches in cartridge overall length. So compare it to most of the Magnums of that era are on 3.340 inches. So they're a little bit longer cartridges, and that's to fit in kind of a 30-06 length magazine. And that gives us some room when we talk about a faster twist barrel, where in theory there's some room to make that cartridge longer if the chamber of your rifle would allow for it. It's been rumored and speculated on that the ideal state would have been to make this 257 Weatherby a full-length Magnum even, but at the time, the powders necessary, some of those slower burning powders, weren't as commercially available to really capitalize on that length. So that's why you see the 257 Weatherby where it's at today, just a bit shorter. And it's long been said to be Roy Weatherby's favorite, or one of his favorite cartridges that was produced. And Weatherby Long has been a speed kills type cartridge, and there's no doubt that this one fits that bill as one of the most overbore cartridges to this day that's been produced. And we say the term overbore, and what that means is we're thinking about the cartridge capacity, so the capacity of our brass relative to the diameter of the bullet that we're propelling. So as we propel a bigger and bigger diameter bullet, like in our 375 H&H, it's not very overbore to be a Magnum with that big of a diameter bullet. But when we get this narrow bullet, like in our 257, and we have this big powder capacity, it's more overbore. So we're pushing it faster in velocities. We might get more barrel wear. We typically need to use a little slower burning propellant when those come out, but we get just incredible velocities coming out of that cartridge. And to give us a frame of reference, that's why I have our 28 nozzler cartridge here, which has been considered quite overbore. The 257 Weatherby is more overbore than our 28 nozzler. It's slightly less overbore than the 26 nozzler and 6.5 300 Weatherbys that are really overbore cartridges. And it's even more overbore than the 50 BMG from a 50 Browning machine gun cartridge. So it is a very fast, flat shooting cartridge that has stood the test of time and holding up as a flat shooting Magnum. So that said, that's some of the history on the cartridge. Let's dive into some numbers, and we're going to start out by comparing the 257 Weatherby to the other popular 25 caliber bullets. So here, when we look at the 257 Weatherby, this is a standard chart that I like to use and some things to just start comparing cartridges with. We're using the same 115 grain nozzler partition bullet, so bullet weight. Ballistic coefficient and sectional density remain the same because it's the same bullet out of the 257 Weatherby, 25-06, and our 257 Roberts and Roberts Ackley improved. The things start to change when we get into muzzle velocity. So we see that we're pushing that 115 grain bullet almost 3,500 feet per second. So we are really pushing this bullet fast down the barrel. We're getting 300 plus feet per second over a 25-06. And we're pushing it nearly, I guess, over 600 feet per second compared to a standard 257 Roberts. So quite the disparity in velocity. Maximum point blank range, we're holding an extra 30 plus yards over the other cartridges. So if you want to hold at a 3-inch target, you're getting quite a bit of extended range out of this target due to its flat shooting nature. Velocity, when it comes to bucking the wind, we do see that we're able to get some reduced wind impact just because that bullet time in flight is quite less than the other cartridges, so we're getting less impact on the wind. And when we really start looking out at our 1,800 feet per second yardage and the yardage where we hold 100 or 1,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, this is where it really starts to shine at. We're holding our 1,800 feet per second, and that's kind of a minimum expansion velocity is the reason we talk about that, out to 745 yards, significantly further than those other cartridges. Same on kinetic energy. So if you want to put downrange energy and downrange bullet performance on a target and you want a 25 caliber, that's where you start to see that 257 Weatherby shine. Maximum point blank range, being able to put your crosshairs on the target and shoot. That's where this cartridge really starts to shine over the other 25 calibers. Let's take it a step further and talk about the 257 Weatherby compared to other cartridges with similar bullet weights to just get you an idea of how it performs relative to others in its class when it comes to being really overbore. So the 257 Weatherby, we're looking at the 26 nozzler and the 28 nozzler using bullet weights of similar sectional density. So this means that we're looking at comparable nozzler partitions, so the same bullet construction. But what we want to do is ensure that we're looking at bullets that are similar in weight relative to their diameter. So we get a good picture of how these cartridges shake out. And this is low data from nozzler to keep it consistent. There is always a chance of some level of bias can get injected when you start looking at a manufacturer's cartridge and manufacturer's low data, but you do see that these numbers are all stacked in really tight. Muzzle velocities are really close together. You see the 26 nozzler is more overbore than either the 28 or the 257 Weatherby. So we're seeing more velocity there. We're seeing point blank ranges still in that 335 to 348. So not a huge difference compared to that. Wind bucking ability, this 26 nozzler shines here. That's in part, if we go back and look, it does have a higher BC and it has a faster velocity. So it's gonna buck the wind better in those cases. And it's also gonna hold downrange energy a bit better due to that BC. The 28 nozzler has just a more weight in the bullet. So when we start stepping up in cartridge diameter, we typically will always see, if the velocities are similar at the muzzle, we'll see that bigger diameter bullet start to pull ahead when it comes to downrange energy. And that almost always remains true if we're looking at the same bullet construction and the same sectional density as we compare across cartridges. But you do see that this 257 Weatherby is no slouch, and it holds its own against both of those cartridges in downrange performance. Take a look at some trajectory numbers quick here too. When we compare the 257 Weatherby compared to the other 25 calibers, there's just no comparison. Incredibly flat shooting cartridge. Especially as you get out to that 600-yard mark, 500-yard mark, it really starts to walk away from the others. And the numbers I always suggest that we look at start to be the differences between yardages. So as you go from 400 to 500 yards, there's a 16-inch difference that we see come up on the 257 Weatherby. On the 25-06, you see there's a 21-inch difference. So we're just talking those margins of error when animals can move when you're ranging. They're not always static. Things move. And a 257 Weatherby, really great antelope cartridge, really great mule deer cartridge. If you've ever hunted antelope especially, they're always moving. The antelope never quite sits still for long enough to sit there, range, sit down, dial, rifle, shoot. They're always moving some bit, and they can cover ground quick. So I like to look at that distance. The yardage and drop between distances is really important. So if you range and it's 425 and you shoot and that animal moved to 475, did you miss completely or are you still on target? And that's why I really start to favor some of these higher velocity cartridges. Take a look at the 257 Weatherby compared to those Nosler cartridges, kind of its contemporaries. And it's no slouch. It's holding its trajectory really well. We extended these out to 700 yards because we are looking at so much velocity. I wanted to show how they separate out. And even at 700 yards, we're still within 11 inches at the most extreme side of it. So closer to 10 inches, 10 and a half. So really flat shooting cartridge, completely holds its own against the contemporary, we call hyper magnums or super magnum cartridges of today. The Weatherby Magnum, really ahead of its time. So we look at the 257 Weatherby Magnum. That's how it stacks up. Traditional bullet weight, 115 grain partition, classic bullet to be shooting out of a 257 Weatherby. But the question comes up, why don't we shoot heavier bullets? There's a blackjack bullet that was a 131 grain bullet that really started to set the standard for 25 calibers, getting their due and having a sleek, high efficient bullet. The little brother of the 6mm has high efficiency bullets. The big brother at 6.5 has these high sectional density, high BC bullets. Why no love for the 257? And traditionally there's just not a lot of 257s. But the other side of it is a lot of the 257s that exist are twisted in 1 in 10 twist barrels, sometimes even slower. So they don't handle and they're not able to stabilize these longer, sleeker, high efficiency bullets with higher BCs. So what to do? Well, what you could do is if you have this 257 Weatherby Magnum and you've got a competent gunsmith and you have the right chamber reamer, you can ream your chamber for maybe a cartridge overall length closer to that 3.340 inches to get utilization of the magazine that likely already exists if you're shooting anything like a, Winchester Model 70, if you're shooting a Tikka that used to be a 300 Winchester Magnum and you wanted to spin on a custom 257 Weatherby barrel, there's no reason not to take advantage of that magazine capacity that's there. So we can get a little bit longer chamber cut, which means we can see that bullet out still pretty far, and all of a sudden we have almost a wildcatted 257 Weatherby. So we took a look at some data and to start to ask the question, how does that 257 Weatherby stack up against the 28 Nosler that we have here and 26 Nosler when we're looking at higher BC bullets? So what we're doing, and we're going to pull up the data again. At the top, this is the data that you've already seen. We're looking at our traditional bullet weight. Down low, we're going to take and look at Berger Elite Hunter bullets. We're going to keep our sectional densities as close as we can to the same. That 28 Nosler gets a little bit of a boost just based on their product availability. But then we're going to take a look at what can we do with some quality hand loads and how does this start to stack up as a modern build and a modern take on this hot rod of a cartridge at the 257 Weatherby. And as we take a look here, that we can get the BCs up pretty darn high, pretty comparable to and slightly exceeding the 26 caliber, your 6.5s with 140 grain, kind of the 140 grain, very popular bullet weight. We are comparing it to 175 grain, 28 nozzler, a little bit heavier on the sectional density on that one. We start looking at muzzle velocities though. That 257 Weatherbys right there. Again, we're stacked right in there with our maximum point blank range. Our wind drift staying really consistent, 1,800 feet per second yardage. Again, we're holding really, really tight with the other cartridges. 6.5 walks away just a little bit on the yardage, and that's going to be because it has just a little bit of edge in velocity. And this is where I keep saying, like, velocity counts, especially on trajectory. So that's where they're getting a little bit more, but they're stacked in there really close at 1,000 yards. Kinetic energy, they're holding in again relatively close. That's where our 28 nozzler with the heavier bullet, the better BC, really starts to walk away in this case. But remember, we are using a higher sectional density bullet with that 28 nozzler. Let's take a look at our trajectory. So we're going to compare on the top here. We're going to look at trajectory of our nozzler partition. Below, we're going to use those Berger Elite Hunter bullets from our previous chart. And when we start looking across the yardages, and let's get out here a ways so we can really compare. At 500 yards, there's not a difference on the trajectory from our traditional bullet to our high BC bullets. And by the time we hit 600 yards, roughly, those high BC bullets start to walk away in trajectory. So the 257 Weatherby is right there. If you're shooting a 26 nozzler or 28 nozzler with, a high BC bullet, if you can get a custom chamber for your 257 Weatherby, you can really turn this cartridge into a modern day hot rod by just having a slightly different chamber cut. And you can use your 257 Weatherby brass, and you've got quite the cartridge that's gonna hold right up against some of the modern ones like our 28 nozzler, which has been my personal favorite hunting cartridge over the last few years. So there's a lot to like about the 257 Weatherby Magnum. Let me know what your thoughts are. Would you like to see the 257 Weatherby maybe reimagined with a chamber and a cartridge overall length at that 3.34 inch mark? Or should we be thinking about taking our friends like the 6.5 PRC or the 7 PRC and making a wildcat there and having a 257 based PRC that can keep right up with our 257 Weatherby, or perhaps exceed it, give it maybe a little sleeker shoulder and some of those modern cartridge design characteristics above and beyond what we see in the classic Weatherby? I'd say something like get rid of the belt, but I don't land the belted Magnums at all. I've never had a problem reloading any of the belted Magnums that I own. So please let me know your thoughts below. I'm really excited to talk about this 257 Weatherby. If you have a cartridge you want to hear about, also put that down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, get out there and enjoy the outdoors.